I now have the privilege of introducing Peter Marks, who will give our first keynote presentation. Peter is a physician scientist. He received his MD and his PhD in cell and molecular biology from NYU. He went on to head the leukemia service at Yale New Haven Hospital and also served as chief clinical officer of the Yale Cancer Center. Peter worked in industry as a researcher, and then in 2016 came to the FDA. And this meeting is all about cross-sector collaboration, academia, industry, FDA. Peter's had all those roles. And Peter, I know he had no idea when he took on this job what was going to happen in vaccines, which fall under his jurisdiction. But I can tell you there's no better person for that role, and there's probably no more important person in keeping us safe right now than Peter Marks. So I'm going to turn it over to Peter, who will talk about advancing the manufacturing of biologics, lessons from the pandemic. Peter.
Well, Dev, thank you so much. You're way too kind. Let me go ahead and share my slides here. Very, very kind. Thanks for the very kind introduction. During this pandemic, it's been a long one, and after 2 years, it's easy to either tune out, or you can reflect and think about what we really needed to learn from this. And when you step back and think about the rate limiting steps to COVID-19 vaccine deployment, people have pointed to a variety of things. Well, it's difficult to get preclinical candidates developed, difficult to conduct randomized controlled clinical trials. It's hard to develop processes and scale up manufacturing. And there's everybody's favorite problem. The FDA is in the way, and there are regulatory pathway hurdles and regulatory review issues. But having been sitting here for the couple years through this, it's pretty clear to me that the biggest problem we've had that continues to be an issue is that process development, scale up of manufacturing is one of the real things that has been a challenge. Now, the reason why I'm really interested in this is because this is one of those things that if we help fix it for this pandemic, the next pandemic, we will also help fix something that we need fixed now for our general manufacturing of biologics, particularly the manufacturing of cell and gene therapies, where if we could have a quantum leap in our manufacturing capacities and our capabilities, we could potentially have cell and gene therapies available at a much lower cost and much greater quantity. So for vaccine development, the way that vaccine development got sped up using kind of the traditional things that we had, the traditional manufacturing methods that we had, was that the process was essentially un-de-risked. What do I mean by that? Normally, vaccine development is an incredibly risk-averse process. Why? Because these are not big money makers, and people don't want to spend a lot of money developing a manufacturing process and sinking costs into a large manufacturing facility until one knows that one has a vaccine that is likely to be used widely, or at least used sufficiently to make economic return on it. So things proceed in stages, and you usually do commercial manufacturing scale up very late in the process in phase 3, or sometimes even when you're submitting or in the process of submitting to the agency. On the other hand, if one has a pandemic, you might decide to do your commercial scale up and manufacturing at risk as soon as you know you have a vaccine that's immunogenic in phase 1. And that's exactly what probably, if you had to look back at what the insight in warp speed was that made the biggest difference for vaccines, it was basically that as soon as you had immunogenicity demonstrated in phase 1 and a safety profile that looked like it would be acceptable, just go and start doing commercial scale manufacturing. Why? Because even if you manufacture tens of billions of doses of vaccine at a cost of a few $1 billion, if it turns out the vaccine isn't effective, well, you've wasted a few $1 billion. On the other hand, if it turns out the vaccine is effective and you don't have it, and you have to shut down your economy for a month or two, well, you've lost $1 trillion. And so you can see here that these are not a bad bet. So this is what happened here. But what were the bottlenecks that were encountered when this was done during this pandemic? There were raw materials issues. For example, for the mRNA vaccines early on, it was a matter of finding lipids. Issues with disposable supplies that still dog us right now. There was the need to find adequate bioreactor capacity, and we could spend a whole hour talk on issues with bioreactor capacity and the challenges of this. Even the last steps of the process, finding fill finish capacity, just being able to get the stuff that you've made into vials and get labels on the vials was rate limiting. And on top of all of this, if you have a pandemic, you can't suddenly like go out on the street and repurpose construction workers to be sterile facility workers. You actually have to have a skilled workforce that's ready to do this. So one of the things that at least goes through my mind, and I think others, is whether we could start to think more about advanced manufacturing, which could improve the agility, flexibility, reliability, and reproducibility of manufacturing processes for biologic products by using either continuous or semi-continuous production processes. And this could apply to vaccines, cell and gene therapies, as well as other complex biologics. And importantly, as I already mentioned, this could actually help us in non-pandemic times by really transforming our ability to produce products in a scalable manner at a lower cost. At the end of the day, the vaccine supply could be more easily ramped up on short notice. And some vaccines, could be, we could have them made at some low level most of the time. And then when we have an outbreak of an infection, we could scale that up very quickly. Now, we're also in the middle of coronavirus, that we don't forget that, just a few years ago, we had a yellow fever outbreak. It wasn't a pandemic nature, but there were some outbreaks in countries that were pretty nasty. And it'd be nice if we could potentially deal with these things rather than having shortage situations by ramping up supply rapidly. So how do you do that? Well, you can build really big facilities. This is the Samsung Biologics manufacturing plant, which may be one of the largest biologics manufacturing plants in the world with 12, 15,000 liter bioreactors. They have them so they can be configured in a variety of ways, but they can pump out biologics. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to think about continuous manufacturing, a la what was done for small molecules. Now, Dr. Woodcock was very early on a proponent of advanced manufacturing, continuous manufacturing for small molecules. And this is just an example of really the transformation of drug substance into drug product that can be done using advanced manufacturing. And it's very nice because you can move around the tableting sizes as you need be. You can keep things moving right through the process. And importantly, you can do this in a much smaller facility than one could, with a much smaller footprint and fewer people actually having to attend to the process, albeit they have to be pretty savvy people, but fewer people needed to attend to this manufacturing process. Now, for biologics, you can have a very similar process that actually can make drug substance and move that over into drug product. The truth is, for many biologics, the transformation from drug substance to drug product is not quite as big a deal as it is for small molecules. For small molecules, you have the active substance ingredient that then has to get put with a variety of things that are able to make it formulated into a pill. Whereas for biologics, it's mainly getting it sterilely into vials and getting a label on it properly. And so you can have this, and people have started to think about this for biologics. either in continuous processes or semi-continuous. Why do you have to be semi-continuous? It's because for some of the processes, you're not just getting a secreted protein, you're getting a protein that actually kills the cells as the process grows on and the protein's expressed. So you have to kind of have a feeder that feeds into different bioreactors, but it's possible. And the nice thing about this kind of continuous manufacturing is you can potentially package it into these small biolabs that can be essentially shipped anywhere. And you can imagine that for a pandemic, you could actually have a process where you have a vaccine manufacturing process where you package up 10, 20, 30 of these, and just instead of shipping the vaccine all over the world, you put the facilities closer to where things are needed, or you have them where things are needed when you need to ramp up production. So all of this has been possible in part through what we've been doing over this time to make safe, pure, and potent biologics. We've used our emergency use authorities to help us through this pandemic. It's been important for manufacturing because the manufacturing standards that we can use for emergency use authorization are much more flexible than for the biologics license application. We have made sure that we have held these biologics to very high standards, but in the setting of the pandemic, we have not had to do every last thing that we would normally do for a licensed biologic. That has been helpful because we have had the benefit risk much in favor often of trying to get things out there, perhaps without having that third or fourth conformance lot. And we've been trying to make sure that we've really conveyed to the public that the quality of these products is what's key. Really, it's a focus on what matters and not just what's bureaucratic here. So the emergency use authorization for manufacturing has given us this ability to adapt and to be flexible and agile, which has been very helpful. Hopefully, as we move forward, some of what we've done here in manufacturing will move forward from the pandemic, including kind of the dialogue that we've had to advance manufacturing procedures more rapidly, and this picking up of advanced manufacturing, which could help us, as I say, not just in a pandemic situation, but in everyday manufacturing. We have also, we'll need to be thinking about global regulatory convergence, which will help us as we do this manufacturing. And I think what we've learned as we've gone through this pandemic is that for manufacturing, early dialogue has facilitated the efficient development of processes. We know that from when it comes to clinical trials, there has been a benefit of these seamless phase clinical trials programs. We know that manufacturing has been the weakest link here, and it continues to be. Think about diagnostic tests, think about our challenges producing large quantities of antivirals, and for that matter, producing vaccines in quantities that actually can meet the global, not just United States need. We've been lucky to have emergency use authorization because it's allowed us flexibility, but we also need to take advantage of global regulatory convergence to help products move from country to country during pandemics. And I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Peter. Wonderful presentation as usual. We have a question from the audience, and this relates to the processes for vaccine approval. The question is, has what has gone on over the past couple of years led to potential improvements in the two-step review process for vaccines, with CBER, FDA making the initial call, and then CDC weighing in as well?
Yeah, so I think we've had very good dialogue between FDA and CDC. I'm not gonna say that things have been perfect, but I think things have worked out pretty well. I do think that as we think about after action reports for this pandemic, we really will need to think through whether the concept of having the FDA approval followed by an ACIP review is really the perfect way to do this, or whether we should somehow meld the two together, because I think the agility here has sometimes suffered a little bit from having two separate processes rather than one integrated process. The additional thing is that when it comes to vaccines, if there is any daylight between government entities whatsoever, the anti-vaccine sentiment picks up any slight differences, which are normal in any scientific dialogue, and has exacerbated that. And if there's any catastrophe from this pandemic, it's been the anti-vaccine issues that have come up. So minimizing that would be ideal.
Terrific. Well, Peter, I remember last year asking you what keeps you up at night. And I recall the answer was breakthroughs, breakthrough variants that would break through the vaccines. And I'd like to pose that question to you again this year. What keeps you up at night, both with regard to the pandemic overall and specifically about vaccine manufacturing?
So, okay, so what keeps me up at night around, I'm going to answer three things. For vaccine manufacturing, it's really that will we be able to have the capacity to manufacture the best of vaccines in the capacities that we need to allow globally all people around the world to get the highest quality vaccines, because really, I think the current concept of some vaccines having higher efficacy, some lower efficacy, really, we want to be able to have sufficient quantities of vaccines that have the highest effectiveness available for the global population. So it's vaccine manufacturing. The second thing, and I'll be quick, I'm sorry. The second thing that keeps me up at night is son of Omicron or daughter of Delta, and where we're going to head with some new variant. The hope is obviously, I mean, the wishful thinking is that after Omicron, we'll have good immunity against Delta, and that we will have some herd immunity going on here that will allow this to finally quiet down enough to get onto a more influenza-like yearly immunization schedule without having widespread pandemic. But that's my wish. I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but obviously we have to be prepared for something else, because this particular pandemic has continued to outsmart us all. But the final thing that has really driven home over the past several months is that keeps me up at night is the lack of trust in a basic public health measure that saves lives is catastrophic in this country. The fact that we still have tens of millions of people who refuse to take vaccines, who are now flooding our hospitals in the Midwest and South and Southwest. The fact that we have an effective vaccine that's only being used right now by 25% of children eligible for it, despite the fact that Omicron is filling up pediatric hospitals and pediatric ICUs. There's something catastrophic about that. And I think we're all going to have to step back and think about what we need to do from the social science perspective. That's not my area of expertise, but it is something that you have to step back, and it does keep me up at night.
Peter, last question before we let you go. The question comes up often: when is it time to get your fourth dose? As someone who got my booster in August as a healthcare worker, and looking forward, I just wonder if you've given some thought to whether we'll be getting boosters every 6 months, once a year. Is this something that's going to be going on for years? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I saw Dr. Califf flitting through on the Zoom here at some point. I have to say, I'll take after Dr. Califf here, because I've heard him say multiple times, I'm a data-driven kind of guy. I'm a data-driven kind of guy. I'd like to see the data about how long we get protection here. But if I had to predict in our crystal ball, the hope would be that after our third shots, we're able to get enough time out of them that we end up on essentially a yearly COVID-19 booster, much like hopefully we can get on some regular schedule, somewhat like in the fall with you get influenza vaccine, you'll get your COVID booster for the year. Alternatively, there is a fair amount of interest in trying to make a pan SARS coronavirus 2 vaccine, but I'm not going to hold my breath on that one because I've been holding my breath for, I did hold my breath for a universal influenza vaccine a few years ago, and I turned blue and had a gasp for breath. So I'm not going to hold my breath. Will probably be, my guess is having yearly boosters for a few years at least, unless there's some major breakthrough there.
Peter, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation and for all you do for so many people. Just can't thank you enough.